Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and everything in between. Welcome back to What's on the Playlist today. And today I want to talk about the album Pieces of You by Jewel, the image of which you will see here. Some of Jewel's history, I think, is kind of better well known just because of how unusual it was. She was born in Utah, but shortly after that, her family moved to Alaska, where I think one of her grandfathers was from. She grew up in a house without running water or heat. They basically lived like frontiersmen in the old west. You know, they lived in a cabin with a coal stove. They only ate what they could catch and kill or gather themselves. She said she loved it. You know, she spent her summers riding horses and picking berries, and she loved the life. When she was a teenager, she was awarded a partial scholarship to study music in, I think it was Michigan, a school in Michigan. And like the town itself did fundraisers for her and managed to get the rest of her tuition, and she went to study in Michigan, and that's where she learned to play guitar and started writing music. She eventually relocated to Southern California, where she would be busking, which, if you don't know what the term is, meaning playing the sidewalk with your hat out for money and playing in some local bars and clubs and stuff. All very interesting. About the album itself, and about this is Jewel's debut album. She'd been playing in local clubs. Someone from a local band, I think the name of the band was Rust, basically called his manager and said, "You got to come down and see this surfer girl playing in this club every Thursday. You got to come down and see her." So his manager, along with an executive from Atlantic Records, came down and watched her, and wanted to sign her up and do a demo tape. But because she was living in the back of a van at the time, I mean, she toured around, lived in a van. That exec had basically called Atlantic Records and said, "Can we pay for a demo for this girl?" And they did. Some of the songs on here were recorded live. Actually, a fair number of them were, and some of them were recorded in the studio. They were actually recorded in Neil Young's studio, at Neil Young's ranch, which I didn't know about that, but I thought that was kind of impressive. Jewel has said she doesn't like recording in studios. She's a live performer. She's always been a live performer. She performed live for years. So part of it was that she feels that she feeds off the energy of the crowd. You know, she likes being in front of people. She feels it's more natural and honest. The other thing too is that she says when you record in a studio, you know, she's used to playing and singing at the same time, as you do live. But when you record in a studio, you record the tracks separately. So you lay down the guitar track, no singing. You know, you lay down the tracks, the individual instruments, and then when you're singing, you know, you're basically staring at a blank wall with your headphones on, singing and not playing a guitar, which is, you know, she's used to performing live, and she prefers it that way. So she has a very difficult time recording in studio. Upon release, the album was kind of a flop. It did not do well at all. It got a lot of negative reviews. You know, there's some people who were reviewing it like, this is like the worst of indie girl pop, indie girl folk music. They really hammered this album. And it was released in 1995, I think. But 2 years later, Bob Dylan invited her to tour with him. And that got her national exposure. That got her positive exposure. You know, oh, she's touring with Bob Dylan. You know, people gave her a different listen because she was touring with Bob Dylan. And the album shot up the charts. I think it peaked at number 12. I might have that number wrong. Don't quote me on that. But it climbed pretty high on the US Billboard charts. And they did re-record a couple songs for a re-release. Since then, it's gone on to become one of the best-selling albums of all time, one of the best-selling debut albums too. In 2020, they re-released remastered editions. They added some B tracks and stuff, which I do not have here. I really would like to. I might wind up picking that up and getting rid of this one. I like B-sides. You don't hear much of that anymore. For old people like me, and I know what a B-side is. For younger people, back before CDs and streaming, they used to release records, a single record that was like this big with just one song on it that was popular. You know, like say, you know, the most popular song on this was Who Will Save Your Soul. So we release a small record with just Save Your Soul on side A. On side B, a B-side of that record, because you used to have to flip the albums over on the old phonographs, they would just place anything. You know, a lot of times it might have been another song from the album, but they didn't tend to do that in case one of those songs was a hit. They could make more money selling a separate single for that. So a lot of times there were songs that were cut from the album. You know, someone might write 30 songs, but only 10 to 15 songs would fit on the record. So all the other songs that they wrote through the course of the year would get cut and left on the floor. So I might get that because I love B-sides, because you get there's a lot of really good music for B-sides, and it's a shame that they don't get more release. I don't have a lot of personal connection with this album. I like it, but it's, you know, it's something that I encountered later in my life, you know, late 90s, early 2000s. Just on the radio, I liked it. You know, no unusual stories for my personal, so I don't have a lot of personal connection to this album other than the fact that I like it and I think it's good. I find it interesting that critics hated it when it first came out and then all of a sudden turned around and loved it once Bob Dylan offered her to tour with him. The fickle entertainment industry. Gotta love it. It's a fun album. It's kind of slow paced. Jewel learned how to yodel from her father, so there's some of that in her music. You get that kind of yodeling. She's not yodeling, but the way she, you know, instead of like what I would consider vibrato, she does kind of like a yodeling thing with the voice for some notes and stuff. It's a good album. It's worth the respect it gets, finally. Take my recommendation as you will. As always, thanks for watching. As always, my stuff is crap. And until next time, good hunting.